In today's episode of PSYCH CINEMA, we're going to be exploring the psychological themes found in the smash hit Captain Marvel. In Captain Marvel, we're going to explore this concept of emotions, how we can understand their role, but also what to do when we find ourselves either being controlled or overwhelmed by emotions. I'm Jonathan Hetterly, a licensed professional counselor, and this is PSYCH CINEMA. PSYCH CINEMA is Shrink Tank's video series where I explore the psychology found in the films that I watch and love. It's important for me to distinguish films that I watch versus films that I love, because I didn't love Captain Marvel. I thought it was a decent, but overall just okay film, but I really want to take the opportunity to explore one of the central messages of the film, specifically about emotions. So in today's episode, we're going to look at how do we understand emotions, what's the message in the film, but then we're going to look at what do we do with our emotions when we find them to be problematic. And then finally, we're going to wrap up by looking at, in therapy, how do psychologists and mental health professionals deal with changing people's emotions? So let's dive right in. First of all, what is the message of this movie? Because I've seen a lot of think pieces and a lot of reviews that are really highlighting this concept for every girl that's ever been told she's too emotional. What does that mean, though? When we take out the message about girls and we focus mostly on emotions, are we meant to come out of this thinking that all emotions are good or positive? I don't think that's what this movie is saying. In fact, let's really focus on three specific things I believe Captain Marvel is trying to communicate about emotions. So what is this movie saying about emotions? First, I think it's telling the audience, don't moralize emotions. Don't tag emotions as either good or bad. When we do that, oftentimes it leads to people believing they should feel a certain way or that they shouldn't feel a certain thing. And that really creates a lot of conflict within a person if they believe what they're feeling is inherently right or wrong. Secondly, I think this film is definitely sending a message against validating people or determining their worth or potential based upon their emotions. And I think that's really the message here, specifically for young girls. When emotions or emotional expression is viewed in a very sexist and misogynistic way, that girls are somehow less because they're either more emotional than men or just men perceive that women are more emotional than them, and therefore because of that difference, they are less than. So we don't view emotions as a good or bad concept, and we don't validate or judge people based upon their emotions. And then the third thing that this film, I believe, is saying about emotions, and this is the key because this is a huge narrative piece to Carol Danvers becoming Captain Marvel, is don't suppress emotions. So if we talk about don't make emotions good or bad, don't validate or judge people based upon their feelings and their emotions, the third point is really that not thinking about your emotions, not acknowledging, not expressing them leads to all types of problems in life. So therefore, we have these emotions. How do we express them? How do we identify them? How do we accept them in a way? And I think that the movie is very pro-emotions when it comes to those three messages. But then what are we supposed to do with that? How are we supposed to understand emotions? Because part of the reason that I have a career in mental health and counseling is because people come to me that are very distressed about their emotions, that they're struggling with anxiety, they're struggling with depression, sadness, or anger. And they recognize a lot of times that their emotions are complicating their life or getting in the way of what they deem to be a happy or meaningful life. So what do we do about emotions? First is we got to think about emotions oftentimes are misleading or distorted. And when we base our decisions on our emotions, that's what we tend to call emotional reasoning, that it's purely guided by how we feel in that moment. And if emotions can be irrational or escalated or misleading, that oftentimes leads to choices and decisions that later on people tend to regret. The second thing about emotions is oftentimes if we act on them, it really can lead to a lot of impulsive behaviors, reacting without accessing that smart part of the brain, our logical side, our reasonable side. And so if we just act impulsively, we bypass self-control, regulating our emotions, accessing our cognition and our beliefs and our thoughts. So then what are we supposed to do with that? Well, in counseling, we really look at maybe 2 or 3 ways that we approach folks that are very distressed by their emotions. Again, without moralizing them, without judging people for them, and really not suppressing them. We're very much about, let's talk about your emotions. Let's bring it out versus bury it within. And so let's talk about 3 common ways therapists or mental health professionals address emotions. Number 1 is this theory called cognitive behavioral therapy. And what cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, really identifies is that it looks at this pattern of thinking, access emotions, which oftentimes triggers a behavior. And so when we feel a negative or distressing emotion, cognitive behavioral therapy says, well, let's bring it back to what are our beliefs, what are our thoughts that trigger that emotion? And then it tries to identify what's irrational or what is partial or just flat out not true. And then it really is about replacing those faulty beliefs and thoughts with the trickle down or domino effect that will change our emotional expression, which then can lead to different types of behaviors. We see this in Captain Marvel because she's fighting an enemy that she feels very angry towards, and she seeks justice towards these enemies, but then she finds out in the film that, in fact, they're not the enemy. They are victims. And once she has that different data point, it really changes how she feels about both her people as well as the people that she thought were the enemies, and that obviously then changes her choices, decisions, and behaviors. So with CBT, it's really about identify the beliefs that trigger those emotions. And then you have more of a mindfulness approach. And mindfulness is really about, instead of like digging deep and finding the irrational thought or the faulty belief and replacing it, mindfulness is really about looking inward with acceptance and curiosity. So when we're angry, when we're scared, when we are sad or depressed, it's really about looking inward and recognizing that and acknowledging, but it's really about acceptance. Whereas CBT, there may be this sort of tension or conflict to replace and challenge. With mindfulness, it's really about passivity and detachment. How do you detach from your thoughts and feelings with the mindset of your thoughts are just your thoughts, your feelings are just feelings? And oftentimes when we do mindfulness, we implement visualization, where it's like you're very passive and still as you watch your thoughts and emotions or anything negative passing on a stream, and you watch it remove away from you. This idea that we don't have to be in such conflict and push and problem solve within us, that we can just step back and be passive and let it pass through us. Another way that clinicians will approach emotions, especially people with really escalated emotions that are very overwhelming, or there's a pattern where they act upon those emotions and it creates a lot of havoc in their life, is something known as dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. And DBT really is an integration between cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness. So we still try to identify faulty beliefs and irrational thoughts, but we're also trying to create acceptance of negative emotions and this ability to tolerate distress and negative emotions rather than always act on them. Because DBT really thinks about how we have an emotional mind and we have a rational mind, and then we try to bring them together to help create a wise mind where emotions help inform our thoughts and our actions, but we're not controlled by them. So again, Captain Marvel really isn't saying all emotions are good or bad. It actually takes that away. And it's really about how do emotions and feelings play a part into who we are and how we can show more self-regulation and control over our emotions rather than feel controlled by them. But enough about my take on Captain Marvel and emotions. What did you guys make of that? Am I underselling this concept of for every girl that's been told that she's too emotional? What are some examples that you have of Captain Marvel or Carol Danvers showing strong composure and emotional regulation in the film? We'd love to get your comments and your feedback on Captain Marvel. You're also welcome in the comments to leave a recommendation of a film you'd like for us to tackle here on PSYCH CINEMA. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're interested in more content that explores the intersection of psychology and pop culture, be sure to check out shrinktank.com. That's going to do it for this episode of PSYCH CINEMA. I'm Jonathan Hetterly. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon at the movies.